Ever wonder what happens when a scrappy smuggler from Earth stumbles into an alien hellhole and accidentally binds himself to a deadly princess? Buckle up, because Kael Voss is about to face trials that'd break most men. Monsters, mind probes, and a woman who's as dangerous as she is irresistible. This is one wild ride you won't see coming. Love Kael and Zyra's chaos? Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next wild story. We've got more galaxy-spanning adventures coming your way. Join the crew and let's explore the stars together. Kael Voss slouched in the creaky pilot chair of the Raven's Claw, boots kicked up on the cracked console, a half-empty flask dangling from his hand. The dim glow of the star map flickered across his face, lighting up the messy tangle of dark hair and the scar that snaked down his left arm. At 32, he was a smuggler from Earth. Not the hero type, just a guy trying to scrape by in a galaxy that didn't give two shits about him. The Raven's Claw was his world, a banged-up hunk of metal reeking of engine grease, stale whiskey, and too many close calls. Every dent in its hull told a story, and Kael had lived through them all, usually with a curse on his lips and a grin he couldn't quite hide. He squinted at the scratched-up screen in front of him, flicking through the data on his latest haul, a glowing bioenergy core stashed in the hold. The thing was weird, pulsing like it was alive, and worth more than his ship, his debts, and probably his life combined. Some high roller from Zarathra had offered triple his usual rate to get it back, no questions asked. "Computer," he muttered, his voice rough from too many late nights. "Run another scan on that damn thing." The AI's flat tone crackled back through the speakers. Scan complete. Contents: one bioenergy core, origin unknown. No hazards detected. Kael snorted, taking a swig from his flask. "Yeah, that's what you said last time. Still feels like trouble." Trouble was Kael's middle name. Well, not really, but it might as well be. He wasn't some polished flyboy with a clean record. He cursed too much, drank too hard, and had a habit of breaking every rule he stumbled across. But that's what kept him alive. He wasn't the toughest or the slickest, just a scrappy bastard with a head full of street smarts and a knack for dodging the Reaper. Like that time in the Rigel 7 asteroid belt, hauling stolen goods when pirates jumped him. Most would have frozen, but Kael? He rigged a bomb from junk, some wires, a busted fuel can, and a whole lot of spite. "Eat this, you pricks," he'd growled, lobbing it out the hatch. The blast sent them running, and he limped away, laughing as the Raven's Claw groaned under the strain. That's Earth grit for you. Messy, raw, and tougher than it looks. Right now, though, Kael was neck-deep in a mess he couldn't laugh off. He'd snatched that bioenergy core from Zarathra a few weeks back, thinking it'd be his ticket out. Wipe the debts, ditch the bounty hunters, maybe even buy a decent drink for once. But the second he grabbed it, everything went to hell. The Zarathrans slapped a price on his head, so big he could feel the crosshairs on his back. And now every lowlife with a ship was after him. He'd been running ever since, patching the Raven's Claw with whatever he could find, dodging patrols, and praying the engines wouldn't crap out mid-jump. Then the message came. It buzzed through the comms late one night, cutting through the static like a knife. "Bring the core to Zarathra," the voice said, smooth and cold, like it belonged to someone who didn't hear no too often. "Deliver it, and you're free. Debt's cleared. No more bounty." Kael leaned back, boots still propped up, and swirled the whiskey in his flask. "Sounds like a load of crap," he muttered, smirking at the star map. "Nobody hands out get-out-of-jail-free cards like that." He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of it. The ship was falling apart, the bounty was climbing, and he was out of moves. So, with a grunt and a curse, he punched in the coordinates for Zarathra. "Way to go, Kael," he grumbled, watching the stars streak by as the Raven's Claw hummed beneath him, walking right into the shitstorm. He didn't trust it. Not the voice, not the deal, not a damn thing about it. Jobs like this always had a catch, and he'd bet his last drop of booze it'd be a nasty one. But something about it gnawed at him, like an itch he couldn't scratch. Maybe it was the slim chance to break free, or maybe he just liked screwing with fate. Kael Voss wasn't built for the easy way out. He was made for the hard road, the kind of chaos that'd chew up anyone else and spit them out. And Zarathra? That place was about to turn his life upside down. One wrong move, one bad call, and he'd be in deeper than he'd ever been. The Raven's claw rattled as it broke through Zarathra's atmosphere, the engines groaning like they were begging for a break. Kael Voss slouched in his chair, boots still propped on the console, one hand gripping his flask while the other flicked at the controls. He squinted through the cracked viewport as the planet came into view, a swirling mess of red mist and shimmering heat, like someone had spilled blood across the stars. Well, shit, he muttered, taking a swig. Looks like hell with a side of crazy. The ship jolted as it skimmed over a bubbling ocean of acid, the surface spitting and hissing below. Up ahead, massive pillars loomed out of the haze, holding up floating platforms. Cities, he guessed, glinting like they were carved from metal and bone. Zarathra wasn't like any place Kael had ever seen. The air was thick, heavy with a weird hum that set his teeth on edge, and faint shrieks echoed from the depths, like something down that was pissed off and hungry. He'd heard rumors about this planet, how the women ran everything, a matriarchy so strict that guys like him were either muscle or breeding stock. Great, he grumbled, smirking at the thought. Just what I need, bossy ladies with alien tech. The Raven's claw shuddered again as it docked at a platform, the landing gear scraping against something smooth and slick. Kael grabbed the bioenergy core from the hold, its faint glow pulsing through the sack he'd stuffed it in. Let's get this over with, he said, kicking open the hatch. Stepping out, he nearly choked on the heat. The platform stretched wide, lined with sleek, curved buildings that looked alive, walls shifting slightly, like they were breathing. Red fog curled around his boots, and the smell hit him hard, sharp, metallic, with a weird sweetness that made his head spin. Computer, he rasped into his wrist comm. This place gonna kill me? The AI's dry voice buzzed back. Atmosphere stable. No immediate threats detected. Kael snorted. Yeah, sure. Tell that to my gut. He hefted the sack over his shoulder, scanning the shadows. Something felt off, way off, and he learned long ago to trust that itch when it started scratching. Then she appeared. Out of the mist, like a damn ghost, came Zyra Vethra. Kael froze mid-step, his breath catching for a second before he could play it cool. She was tall, lean, and dangerous, her skin shimmering like liquid silver under the red light, her eyes glowing a deep, bloody red that pinned him where he stood. Her hair was black and slick, spilling down her back like oil, moving just enough to make him wonder if it had a mind of its own. She wore this tight bio-armor that hugged every curve, little tendrils twitching along the edges, half sexy, half creepy, and all trouble. You're late, she said, her voice low and smooth, cutting through the hum of the platform like a blade. Kael smirked, shifting the sack. Yeah, well, traffic's a bitch out there. You the big shot who sent the invite. Zyra tilted her head, those red eyes sizing him up like he was meat on a hook. You're Kael Voss, she said. Not a question, just a fact. The thief who took what's ours. He shrugged, playing it loose even as his pulse kicked up. Borrowed it, maybe. Figured I'd drop it off, grab my freedom, and we all go home happy. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like she was amused he'd even try that line. Before he could say more, two guards stepped out behind her, big, hulking types with armor that hissed like it was alive. Hand it over, one growled, reaching for the sack. Kael yanked it back, instincts flaring. Easy, pal. I don't hand shit to anyone till I see the deal. The guard lunged, faster than Kael expected, and he twisted, ducking the grab. But the move sent him stumbling, right into Zyra. His hand brushed her chest, snagging on this weird bio-collar around her neck. A jolt shot through him, hot and sharp, like he'd grab a live wire. The collar flared, energy crackling, and they both hit the deck hard, tangled up for a split second. Her breath hot on his face, those red eyes locked on his, close enough to feel the heat rolling off her. What the hell? Kael started, scrambling back, but Zyra was already up, her glare cutting through him. You idiot, she hissed, brushing herself off, though her voice had an edge, like she wasn't sure whether to kill him or laugh. The air buzzed, the guards froze, and Kael's guts sank. He didn't know what he'd just done, but one look at Zyra's face told him it was big. Real big. And probably the dumbest move of his life. Kael Voss scrambled to his feet, heart pounding like a drum in his chest, brushing the dust off his jacket as he stared at Zyra Vethra. That jolt from her bio-collar still buzzed through his fingers, hot and weird, like he'd stuck his hand in a live socket. What the hell was that? He snapped, shaking it off. But Zyra just stood there, her red eyes narrowing like she was trying to figure out if he was dumb or just unlucky. The guards around them froze, weapons half raised, like they'd seen a ghost. The air on the platform felt heavier now, humming with something Kael couldn't name, and his gut screamed one thing. He'd screwed up bad. Before he could open his mouth again, a shadow loomed out of the red fog. Matriarch Vorin stepped forward, tall and intimidating, her gray skin glinting under the dim light. Long biotendrils trailed from her back, twitching like they were alive, and her voice boomed, cold and sharp. "You've done it now, Earthman," she said, staring down at Kael like he was a bug she might squash. He smirked, trying to play it cool despite the sweat trickling down his neck. "Done what? Tripped into your princess? Sorry, lady, I'm not that graceful." Zyra cut in, her tone icy but with a flicker of something else. Maybe amusement. "That wasn't just a trip, you fool. You touched my collar. Activated it." Kael blinked, glancing at the glowing thing around her neck. "Activated? Well, like a light switch. Come on." But Vorin raised a hand, silencing him. "It's the oath beneath the skin," she said, her words heavy. "An ancient rite of Zarathra. By touching her, you've bound yourself to my daughter. You're hers now, unless you prove you're worthy." Kael's jaw dropped. "Bound? Hers? Hold up. What the hell does that mean?" He laughed, short and rough, running a hand through his messy hair. "I came to drop off a damn core, not sign up for whatever this is." Zyra stepped closer, her red eyes locking onto his, intense enough to make his breath hitch. "It means you face 3 trials," she said, voice low and dangerous. "Pass them, and you're free. Fail, and you're dead, or worse." Kael stared back, half ready to bolt, half caught by that look in her eyes. "Great," he muttered. "Just my luck. Guess I'm in deep now, huh?" And deep down, he knew there was no running from this one. Kael Voss didn't get a chance to catch his breath after that mess with Zyra's bio-collar before they dragged him off. Literally dragged, his boots scraping the slick platform as 2 hulking guards hauled him towards some kind of arena. "Hey, easy," he barked, twisting their grip. "I can walk, you overgrown tin cans." They didn't even grunt, just dump him at the edge of a massive pit carved into Zarathra's floating city. He stumbled, catching himself, and looked down. "Oh, you gotta be kidding me," he muttered, his stomach dropping like a stone. The place was a nightmare. A huge, circular pit stretched out below, its floor flooded with bubbling acid that hissed and spat like a pissed-off beast. The water, or whatever it was, glowed a sickly green, steam curling up in thick clouds that burned his nose with every breath. The heat hit him hard, plastering his dark hair to his forehead, and he wiped sweat off his face with a shaky hand. Jagged walls rose around the pit, studded with glowing biolights that pulsed like veins, casting eerie shadows over the whole damn thing. And in the middle, half submerged, was Krathar, the biggest, ugliest octopus Kael had ever seen. Its massive body shimmered black and slick, tendrils thicker than his torso, thrashing through the acid, sending sprays of it sizzling against the walls. Its eyes, big, yellow slits, locked on him, and a low, guttural screech ripped through the air, rattling his bones. Above the pit, tiers of seating climbed high, packed with Zarathra's female warriors. They leaned over the edges, their bio-armor glinting under the red haze, smirking and whispering like Kael was some kind of sideshow freak. "What's so funny?" he yelled up, flipping them a rude gesture. A few laughed harder, sharp and mocking, their voices echoing off the walls. He clenched his jaw, feeling like a rat in a trap. This wasn't just a fight, it was entertainment, and he was the punchline. The guard shoved him closer to the edge, and he caught the glint of a metal walkway dangling over the acid, swaying slightly in the heat. "Guess that's my dance floor," he muttered, eyeing it warily. Then he saw her, Zyra Vethra. She stood on a platform higher up, arms crossed, looking down at him like a queen sizing up a peasant. That silver skin of hers caught the light, her red eyes glowing fierce and unreadable, and her black hair rippled like it was alive. Her bio-armor hugged her tight, those little tendrils twitching along the edges, and damn if she didn't look every bit as dangerous as the thing in the pit. "Enjoying the view, princess?" Kael called up, forcing a grin despite the sweat trickling down his back. She didn't answer, just kept staring, her gaze tracking his every move like a predator waiting for the kill. The air hummed louder now, thick with heat and tension, and Krathar let out another screech, deep, hungry, and way too close for comfort. Kael swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "This is gonna suck." Kael stood there, toes inches from the drop, staring down at that acid-choked pit and the monster waiting to rip him apart. "I'm out of my damn mind," he thought, his heart thumping so loud he could hear it over the bubbling below. He wasn't a stranger to fear. Hell, he'd felt it plenty of times, that cold grip twisting his guts. But this was next-level crazy. Krathar thrashed again, a tendril slamming the water, and Kael flinched, cursing himself for it. "Get it together, you idiot," he growled inwardly. "You've been through worse." His mind flashed back to that run-in with pirates near Rigel 7. He'd been stuck in open space, no weapons, just a busted ship and a swarm of bastards closing in. The cold had seeped through the hull, so bad his fingers went numb, but he'd swum through it. Figuratively, sure, but felt real enough. He'd rigged a bomb from scraps, blown a hole in their line, and gotten out alive. Same deal here, he told himself, clenching his fists. Just bigger, uglier, and a hell of a lot wetter. He glanced up at Zyra, her red eyes boring into him, and felt a spark of something. Anger, maybe, or stubborn pride. "They think I'm some dumb earth punk who'll fold," he thought. "Screw that. I'll show these alien bitches what a human can do." But the fear didn't let go easy. Every splash from Krathar made his knees want to buckle, and the heat was frying his nerves. What if I can't pull this off? He wondered, a rare crack of doubt slipping in. End up fish food, or whatever that acid turns me into? He shook his head hard. "No, I don't die here. Not today." He'd survived too much. Pirates, bounty hunters, his own damn stupidity, to let some oversized squid take him out in front of a crowd. "You're Kael Voss," he told himself, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "You don't go down easy. Let's give him a show." Kael took a deep breath, muttered a quick, "Here goes nothing," and jumped. He hit the walkway with a clang, the metal swaying under his weight as he caught his balance. The acid churned below, close enough to splash his boots, and the heat slammed into him like a fist. Krathar screeched, louder now, its yellow eyes zeroing in as Kael yanked a jagged metal rod from his belt, something he'd ripped off the raven's claw before they dragged him here. "All right, you ugly bastard," he yelled, twirling it like a makeshift spear. "Let's dance." The first tendril came fast, whipping through the air with a wet slap. Kael dove, rolling across the walkway as it smashed down, cracking the metal where he'd been. "Shit," he yelped, popping back up, his shirt already soaked from the spray. The acid stung his skin, but he shook it off, lunging forward as another tendril swung in. He ducked, sliding under it, and jabbed the rod into its slimy flesh. Krathar roared, thrashing wild, and Kael grinned despite himself. "That's right, you feel that." He scrambled up, boots slipping on the slick surface, and spotted a coil of cable dangling from the walkway's edge, probably some leftover rigging. "Jackpot," he muttered, snagging it as a third tendril lashed out. He jumped, barely clearing it, and hit the deck hard, the impact jarring his teeth. The crowd above jeered, but he ignored them, looping the cable around his arm. "Gotta play dirty," he thought, eyeing Krathar's bulk. The beast lunged, its massive body surging out of the acid, and Kael bolted, running straight at it. "You're insane," he laughed to himself, adrenaline pumping as he leaped onto its back. The skin was slick hot and smelled like death, but he dug his boots in, clinging tight. Tendrils flailed, one catching his leg and yanking hard. "Not today," he snarled, stabbing the rod deep into its flesh. Krathar bucked, nearly throwing him, but Kael held on, wrapping the cable around a thrashing tendril. He pulled tight, tying it off, and rolled free as the beast started tangling itself up, its own strength working against it. The acid splashed higher now, soaking him head to toe, his shirt ripping open to show the scarred muscle underneath. He stumbled back to the walkway, panting as Krathar screeched and twisted, the cable tightening until it couldn't move. "Gotcha!" Kael gasped, collapsing against the railing. The crowd went quiet, and he looked up, dripping wet, to see Zyra stepping down. Her voice cut through the steam, low and steady. Not bad. She grabbed his hand, her grip firm and warm, her red eyes glinting with something he couldn't read. "For an Earthman," she added, and damn if that didn't send a jolt down his spine. Kael stood there, chest heaving, water dripping off him as he tried to catch his breath. His whole body ached, the acid burns stinging like hell, but he was alive, and Krathar wasn't moving anymore, tangled up in its own mess. He wiped his face, grinning despite the pain, and looked at Zyra. She was close now, too close, her silver skin catching the light, her hands still locked around his. "What?" he rasped, half laughing. "Expected me to die down there." She didn't answer right away, just held his gaze with those red eyes, sharp and deep, like they could see right through him. "Most do," she said finally, her voice soft but heavy, like she was weighing him up. Her grip tightened for a second, hot, firm, electric, then let go, leaving his skin tingling. "You're tougher than you look," she added, turning away, but not before he caught a flicker in her face. Not a smile, not quite, but something that said she wasn't laughing at him anymore. Kael ran a hand through his wet hair, shaking off the tension. "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises," he muttered, mostly to himself. The crowd above was buzzing now, whispers rippling through the warriors, and he could feel their eyes on him. Less mocking, more curious. He didn't care. All he knew was that spark between him and Zyra, that weird pull he couldn't shake. First trial down, he thought, smirking. "Guess I'm not dead yet." But as Zyra walked off, her hips swaying just enough to mess with his head, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about surviving. Something had shifted, and he was in way deeper than he'd planned. Kael Voss barely had time to shake off the acid-soaked mess of the first trial before they yanked him away again. This time, it wasn't the open pit of death. No, they shoved him and Zyra Vethra through a heavy, hissing door into a room that felt more like a damn nightmare lab. "What now?" he grumbled, stumbling as the guards pushed him forward, their bio-armor clanking like they enjoyed this too much. The door slammed shut behind them with a thud that echoed in his chest, and Kael froze, taking it all in. "Oh, this is bad," he muttered, his boots scuffing the smooth, glassy floor. The place was a maze of weird tech, walls lined with pulsing tubes, glowing blue and green like veins pumping something alive through them. Machines hummed low and steady, their surfaces slick with a sheen that made them look wet, almost breathing. Cables dangled from the ceiling, swaying slightly, tipped with needle-like ends that glinted in the dim light. The air was thick, heavy with a strange, sweet smell, like overripe fruit mixed with something sharp and chemical. It hit Kael hard, making his head spin and his stomach churn. "Smells like a damn trap," he thought, rubbing his nose, but there was no shaking it off. Every breath pulled that scent deeper, fuzzing up his thoughts. In the center of the room sat Vyris, or at least that's what they called it. It wasn't a monster like Krathar, not exactly. It was a shimmering blob of liquid, floating in a shallow bio-tank, its surface rippling like quicksilver under the flickering lights. Colors danced across it, blues, purples, silvers, shifting so fast it hurt to look at too long. It didn't have eyes or a mouth, but Kael swore it was watching him, sizing him up. A high-pitched whine came from it, sharp and mocking, slicing through the hum of the machines. "What the hell is that thing?" he muttered, stepping back instinctively, his hand twitching toward the empty spot where his blaster used to be. Zyra stood beside him, her silver skin catching the glow, her red eyes fixed on Vyris like she knew something he didn't. "Careful," she said, her voice low, a warning wrapped in that smooth, dangerous tone of hers. "It's not what you think." Kael shot her a look, smirking despite the unease crawling up his spine. Yeah? Looks like a puddle of trouble to me, princess. She didn't bite back, just kept staring, her bio-armor's tendrils twitching like they felt it too. Then the real trouble walked in, Dren Korr. The guy was massive, a wall of muscle and scales, his black, glossy skin shimmering like wet stone. His white, pupil-less eyes locked on Kael, and a growl rumbled out of him, deep and pissed. An outsider like you doesn't belong here, he snarled, stepping closer, his claws flexing. You're not worthy of her. Kael raised an eyebrow, glancing at Zyra. Worthy? Buddy, I'm just trying to not die today. Dren's lip curled, showing jagged teeth, and Kael tensed, ready for a fight, until Vyris screeched again, louder, like it was laughing at the whole damn scene. The room pulsed, the lights dimming as a platform rose beneath Vyris, lifting it higher. Kael's comm buzzed faintly, probably the Raven's Claw picking up interference, but he ignored it, eyes darting between Zyra, Dren, and that freaky blob. This is your second trial, Zyra said, turning to him, her red gaze sharp and challenging. Vyris links minds. It'll dig into yours and mine. No hiding. Kael's smirk faded. Wait, what? He sputtered. You're saying the thing's in a crawl inside my head. She nodded, stepping closer, close enough that he caught a whiff of her, something wild, metallic, intoxicating. Survive it, she said, or it breaks you. The whine from Vyris grew, mocking and eager, and Kael's gut twisted. Fantastic, he muttered. Just what I needed. Kael stood there, staring at Vyris, that shimmering blob pulsing like it was alive, and felt a cold sweat prickling down his back. I hate this, he thought, clenching his fists so hard his knuckles cracked. The idea of something, anything, digging into his head made his skin crawl. He'd spent years burying shit deep, locking it away where no one, not even himself, had to look at it. What if it finds that? He wondered, his breath hitching. That one job, years back, when he'd bolted and left his crew behind. They'd been pinned down by raiders, outgunned, and he'd made the call. Run or die. He ran. They didn't make it. Coward. He called himself ever since, but only in the dark, quiet moments when the whiskey ran dry. If Vyris dragged that up, he wasn't sure he could face it, or Zyra seeing it. He glanced at her, standing there all cool and collected, her red eyes glinting like she didn't have a care in the world. She's hiding something too, he thought, catching the way her jaw tightened when Dren growled at him. What's her deal? Kael could feel the weight on her. Something heavy, something she didn't let slip. Maybe it was her mom, matriarch Vorin, pulling strings behind the scenes. He'd heard Dren's jab about worthy. Was Zyra stuck picking between him and that scaly asshole? She's tough as nails, Kael thought, watching Zyra's steady stance. But even she's got cracks. He wondered what Vyris would pull out of her. Some royal secret, some shame she buried under that icy front. The thought almost made him smirk. Guess we're both screwed if this thing spills everything. But it wasn't just about secrets getting out. It was about surviving whatever Vyris threw at him. What if it messes me up? He wondered, his throat tightening. He'd heard stories of mind probes driving people nuts, leaving them babbling wrecks. Kael wasn't some fragile rookie, but this wasn't a fist fight or a shootout. He couldn't punch his way out of his own head. I've taken worse, he told himself, trying to shake the doubt. Pirates, explosions, that damn asteroid belt. I always pull through. He flexed his scarred hand, grounding himself. This is just another mess. I'll figure it out. Still, Zyra's presence gnawed at him. She was right there, close enough to feel the heat off her, and he couldn't tell if she was a partner in this or just another hurdle. Can we even stand each other after this? He thought. She'd seen him take down Krathar, sure, but this was different, raw, personal. If Vyris linked them, he'd see her too, all her edges and shadows. Maybe she'll hate me, he mused, picturing her red eyes turning cold. Or maybe I'll hate her. But deep down, a stubborn spark flickered. Screw it, he decided, straightening up. I'm not letting some alien goo break me. Not in front of her, not in front of anyone. I'm Kael Voss. I got this. He took a shaky breath, glancing at Zyra again. She met his eyes, steady and fierce, like she was daring him to crack. "Ready?" she asked, voice low. Kael forced a grin, hiding the churn in his gut. "Born ready, princess," he lied, stepping toward Vyris. "Let's see what this bastard's got." The room pulsed as Kael and Zyra stepped closer to Vyris, the shimmering blob rising higher in its tank, tendrils of liquid stretching out like it was reaching for them. "Here we go," Kael muttered, bracing himself. Before he could blink, Vyris moved fast. A thin, glowing strand shot out, latching onto his chest, cold and wet, sinking through his jacket like it wasn't even there. Another hit Zyra, her bio-armor flaring briefly as it connected. Kael gasped, stumbling back, but there was no pulling away. The thing was in him, a sharp, buzzing pressure exploding behind his eyes. "Son of a," he started, then the world shattered. His head spun, colors and sounds crashing together like a ship hitting warp. He wasn't in the lab anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't his. Wind whipped past him, hot and sour, and he saw Zyra. Not the Zyra standing next to him, but a younger one, her black hair flying wild as she piloted a sleek craft over Zarathra's acid oceans. The sky burned red above her, waves crashing below, and Kael felt it. Her heart racing, her hands tight on the controls, a desperate hunger for freedom pulsing through her. "Get me out," she whispered, not to him, but to the sky, her voice raw. "I won't be their pawn." The memory hit Kael like a punch. She wasn't just a princess. She was a caged bird, clawing for a way out. Then it flipped. He wasn't in her head anymore. She was in his. Kael's breath caught as he saw himself, slumped in the Ravensclaw's cockpit, stars stretching endless outside the viewport. It was one of those nights, alone, a bottle half gone, the hum of the ship his only company. "Nobody left," he muttered in the memory, voice thick with exhaustion. But then it shifted. Another flash, him dangling from the ship's hull in a meteor storm, tools in hand, swearing as he patched a breach. "Not dying today," he growled, forcing the panel shut while rocks pounded the ship. Zyra's presence brushed against him, sharp and curious, feeling his stubborn fight to live. Their minds tangled tighter, breaths syncing up in the real world. Kael's hands clenched, sweaty, and he felt Zyra's fingers brush his. Instinct, maybe, or something else. The lab faded back in, but Vyris wasn't done. Images flooded faster. Zyra, facing her mother, defiance in her eyes as Vorin demanded obedience. Kael running from that doomed crew, guilt clawing at him as blaster fire echoed behind. "No," he yelled, voice cracking, trying to push it away, but Vyris dug deeper, pulling out every raw, messy piece of them. Their gasps echoed together, loud in the quiet, bodies trembling as the connection burned. Dren Korr's voice cut through, smug and loud. "He's weak. Look at him." Kael's eyes snapped open, blurry, seeing the bastard smirking from the sidelines. Rage flared, hot and sudden, but before he could snap back, Vyris went wild. The blob surged, splitting into jagged spikes, shattering its tank with a wet crack. Glass flew, machines sparked, and the room shook as Vyris screeched. A high, piercing sound that made Kael's ears ring. "Oh shit," he shouted, ducking as a spike whipped past his head, smashing into the wall. Zyra staggered beside him, her armor sparking, but she grabbed his arm, yanking him up. "It's breaking loose," she hissed, her grip tight. The lab turned into chaos, guards yelling, Dren barking orders, Vyris thrashing like storm. Kael's head pounded, still reeling from the memories, but he shook it off, adrenaline kicking in. "We gotta stop it," he yelled, scanning the wreckage. He spotted a control panel flickering near the tank, half fried but still buzzing. "Cover me," he told Zyra, bolting for it. She nodded, stepping forward, her bio-armor flaring as she blocked a spike aimed at him. Kael slid under a tendril, slamming into the panel, fingers fumbling over the controls. Come on," he muttered, then froze. Zyra's memory of freedom flashed again, mixing with his own stargazing nights. "Calm down, you freak," he growled at Vyris, closing his eyes and picturing it. Earth's quiet sky, stars steady and bright. He pushed that piece into the chaos, willing it through the link. Vyris screeched once more, then slowed, its spikes drooping, the liquid pooling back into the tank. The room stilled, smoke curling up from the wreckage, and Kael slumped against the panel, panting. "Holy hell," he rasped, wiping sweat off his face. "That worked." Kael leaned against the busted panel, chest heaving, his head still buzzing from Vyris's wild ride. The lab was a mess, broken glass everywhere, machines smoking, and that damn blob finally quiet in its tank. He looked over at Zyra, her silver skin smudged with soot, her red eyes locked on him. Not cold, not pissed, just different. "You okay?" he asked, voice rough. She nodded, slow, like she was still processing it all. "You?" she shot back, stepping closer. He smirked, shaky. "Been better. Been worse." She stopped right in front of him, close enough that he could feel her breath, steady but fast. Her hand lifted, hesitating, then landed light on his chest, right where Vyris had hit him. Her touch was warm, firm, and Kael swore he felt her pulse through it, quick and alive. "You did it," she said, her voice low, a little hoarse, like she hadn't expected him to pull through. "Calmed it down." He chuckled, brushing it off. "Yeah, well, I'm good at pissing things off and fixing it after. Old habit." But he couldn't shake it. The way she looked at him now, like she'd seen something real in all that mess Vyris dragged up. He'd seen her too, her fight, her fire, and it stuck with him deeper than he wanted to admit. "We're in this together now, huh?" he thought, meeting her gaze. Her fingers lingered a second longer, then dropped, but the air between them hummed, heavy with something unspoken. "You're not what I thought," she said finally, turning away, but not before he caught a flicker of a smile, small, sharp, real. Kael ran a hand through his sweaty hair, grinning despite himself. "Right back at ya, princess," he muttered under his breath. Dren stomped over, growling something about luck, but Kael ignored him. The trial was done, and he'd survived. More than that, he'd gotten under Zyra's skin, same as she'd gotten under his. Two down, he thought, watching her walk off, that sway in her step messing with his head again. Wonder what's next. Kael Voss didn't even get a chance to wipe the sweat from the last trial off his brow before they dragged him and Zyra Vethra off again. "What now?" he groaned, his voice hoarse as the guards shoved him forward, their bio-armor clanking with every step. This time, they didn't stop at some fancy platform or lab. They hauled them down a winding tunnel deeper into Zarathra's guts until they reached a massive, sealed hatch. It hissed open, steam pouring out like a dragon's breath, and Kael caught a glimpse of what was inside. "Oh, hell no," he muttered, planting his boots, but a hard shove sent him stumbling through. Zyra followed, her red eyes glinting in the dark, and the hatch slammed shut behind them with a clang that echoed like a death knell. The place was a cave, a bio-cave, alive and kicking in the worst way. The air hit Kael like a wet slap, hot and sticky, so thick he could barely breathe without choking on it. His shirt clung to his skin in seconds, sweat beating down his scarred arms as he squinted into the gloom. The walls weren't rock. They were slick, pulsing like some giant organ flexing under his gaze. Thin tendrils sprouted from them, wriggling slow and creepy, dripping with a slick, steamy goo that hissed when it hit the floor. Red light flickered from bio-lumps embedded in the ceiling, casting a hazy glow that made everything look bloody and wrong. "This ain't natural," Kael rasped, stepping back as a tendril brushed his boot, making him jump. "What's next? The walls eat me." The heat wasn't just hot. It was alive, pressing in, making his head swim and his pulse race. Every breath tasted sour, laced with something sharp that tingled on his tongue, and he swore it was messing with him, stirring up his nerves in ways he didn't like. He glanced at Zyra, standing a few feet away, her silver skin shimmering with sweat, her bio-armor's tendrils twitching like they felt it too. "You good?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked. She nodded, sharp and quick, but her eyes darted around, wary. "It's a bio-chamber," she said low and tense. "It tests everything." Kael snorted. "Great. More alien bullshit. Outside, he caught a shadow moving. Dren Korr, that scaly bastard, pacing beyond the hatch. His growl rumbled through the thick walls, muffled but pissed. "He's up to something," Kael muttered, narrowing his eyes. Dren's claws scraped at the hatch, testing it, and Kael's gut twisted. Probably wants to lock us in here till we rot. But honestly, he didn't give a damn about Dren right now. The cave was bad enough, hot, wet, alive, and closing in like it wanted to swallow them whole. The air pulsed louder, the tendrils quivered, and Kael wiped his face, grinning despite himself. "Guess we're stuck, princess," he said, glancing at Zyra. "Hope you're ready for a sweat bath from hell." Kael leaned against the slick wall, instantly regretting it as a tendril squirmed against his back. "I gotta get out of here," he thought, his chest tight with the urge to bolt. The heat, the goo, the damn air. It was too much, clawing at him like a trap he couldn't punch his way out of. The raven's claws waiting, he told himself, picturing his ship, beat up and safe, far from this freaky cave. Just ditch this, ditch her, and run. You're good at that, right? The thought stung, sharp and bitter, but it was there. Running was what he did best. Then Zyra spoke, her voice cutting through the hum, soft but breaking. "They want me to be a tool," she said, staring at the floor, her fists clenched. A thing to breed, to obey, to keep their line going. Kael froze, his runaway plans screeching to a halt. Her words cracked open, raw and jagged, and he saw it. Her standing tall, but crumbling inside, crushed under her mom's shadow, under Zarathra's rules. "I hate it," she whispered, and damn if that didn't hit him hard. He'd been running from chains too, just different ones, debts, bounties, guilt. "I get it," he said, surprising himself, his voice rough. "I don't do cages either." He shifted, meeting her red eyes, and let it slip. "Back on Earth, I ran from everything. Jobs, people, promises. Kept me free, but it's lonely as hell." He smirked, bitter. "Guess I'm scared of being stuck here, stuck with this." He waved a hand between them, the air thick with more than just heat now. Zyra tilted her head, watching him, and he felt bare, like she saw right through his bullshit. "But you," he thought, staring back, "you make me want to stay." It was stupid, reckless, but true. She was fire and steel, and he was drawn to it, even if it burned. "What's wrong with me?" he wondered, shaking his head. "I should run, but I can't." That spark in her eyes, that fight in her voice, it hooked him, and he hated how much he liked it. Screw it, he decided, standing straighter. "I'm not bailing. Not yet. Let's see this through." The cave's heat cranked up, the air turning thick and syrupy, pressing Kael and Zyra closer whether they liked it or not. He stumbled toward her, the floor slick under his boots, and caught himself inches away. "Whoa." He breathed, her scent hitting him, wild, metallic, dizzying. Her red eyes flicked up, locking on his, and their breaths mixed, hot and fast in the tight space. "This place is screwing with us," he muttered, but he didn't pull back, and neither did she. The tendrils on the walls quivered faster, dripping more goo, and the red light pulsed like a heartbeat. "You ever almost die out there?" he asked, voice low, trying to fill the silence before it swallowed them. Zyra nodded, her hair brushing his arm as she leaned in. "Once," she said soft, "I stole a ship, flew it against my mother's orders. Wanted to feel free." Her voice shook, and Kael saw it. Her soaring over that acid ocean, wind tearing at her, defiance burning bright. "Got caught in a meteor storm," he offered back, his hand brushing hers by accident, or not. "Ship took a beating. I hung out the hatch, fixing it while rocks flew past my head. Nearly fell, but I didn't." He chuckled, rough. "Too stubborn to die." Their fingers tangled, sweaty and trembling, neither pulling away. The air buzzed, electric, and Kael's pulse hammered in his ears. "Tell me something else," Zyra whispered, her breath grazing his jaw, and damn if that didn't send a shiver down his spine. "All right," he rasped. "First time I flew solo, I crashed. Walked away with this." He tapped the scar on his arm, grinning. She smirked, faint. "I fought a guard once. Broke his arm. Got locked up for it." Their voices wove together, stories spilling out, raw and real, pulling them tighter. Then the hatch rattled, hard. "Open it." Dren Korr's growl boomed through, followed by a heavy thud. Kael snapped out of it, spinning toward the sound. "That bastard," he snarled, spotting a metal shard wedged in the wall. A piece of the lab's wreckage, maybe. He yanked it free, staggering as the heat spiked again, and jammed it under the hatch just as Dren slammed it once more. "Get lost, you scaly prick," he shouted, kicking the shard deeper. The hatch groaned but held, and Kael turned back, panting. Zyra was right there, closer now, her hands grabbing his shoulders. "Kael," she said, voice thick, and before he could think, she pulled him in. They crashed together, arms wrapping tight, bodies pressed close in the red glow. His heart slammed against his ribs, her heat seeping into him, and he held on like she was the only thing keeping him steady. "This is crazy," he gasped against her neck, but he didn't let go, and neither did she. The hatch finally creaked open, cool air rushing in, snapping Kael and Zyra out of whatever the hell had just happened. He pulled back, breathless, his hands lingering on her arms for a second before dropping. She stepped away too, brushing her hair back, but her red eyes stayed on him, intense and unreadable. "You're more dangerous than I thought," she said, her voice low, a little rough around the edges. Kael smirked, wiping sweat off his face. "Yeah? You're not exactly safe yourself, princess." They stumbled out of the cave, legs shaky, the heat still clinging to their skin. Dren stood there, glaring, his claws flexing like he wanted to rip Kael apart, but the guards waved him off. "Trial's done." One barked, and Dren snarled, stalking away. Kael didn't care. His head was still spinning, replaying that moment in the dark, her grip, her voice. He glanced at Zyra, catching her adjusting her armor, her silver skin glinting under the platform's lights. "We made it," he thought, a grin tugging at his lips. 3 down, and I'm still breathing. She moved beside him, her hand brushing his as they walked, and this time he didn't flinch. Their fingers laced together, tight and sure, like they'd crossed some line they couldn't uncross. "What now?" he asked, half joking, but her look shut him up, serious, fierce, promising more. "Whatever's next," she said, squeezing his hand. "We face it together." Kael nodded, feeling the weight of it settle in. "Damn right," he muttered, ready for anything with her by his side. Kael Voss and Zyra Vethra barely had a second to breathe after stumbling out of that bio-cave before everything went to hell. The guards didn't lead them back to the platform this time. Instead, they shoved them through a tunnel that spat them out into a place Kael could only describe as a living nightmare, Zarathra's bioforest. "What the?" he started, but the words died in his throat as the scene hit him full force. The air exploded with noise, crashing, screeching, the hum of something alive and angry all around them. "This ain't good," he muttered, his boots sinking into the soft, wet ground. The forest wasn't like anything on Earth. Towering trees loomed overhead, but they weren't wood. They were flesh pulsing and slick, their bark oozing a thick, red slime that dripped down in slow, sticky trails. The stuff pooled at the roots, bubbling faintly, and the smell slammed into Kael like a punch, sharp, sweet, and heavy, clogging his lungs with every breath. It wasn't just a scent, it was a kick to his nerves, making his skin prickle and his head buzz like he'd down a bad shot of something strong. Vines hung low, wriggling like worms, tipped with glowing buds that pulsed red and cast a bloody glow over everything. The ground squished underfoot, alive and warm, and Kael swore he felt it shift like it was watching them. Then the real trouble came crashing through. Dren Korr burst into the clearing, his black scales glinting wet under the light, his white eyes blazing with hate. "The outsider dies," he roared, voice shaking the trees, and behind him came a pack of killers, 6, maybe 7, all decked in bio-armor, claws and blades gleaming. They moved fast, fanning out, cutting off any chance of running. Kael's hand twitched for a weapon he didn't have, and he shot a look at Zyra. She was already on her feet, her silver skin shining through the sweat and grime, her red eyes narrowing as she squared up. "Guess this is it," he said, stepping back until their shoulders brushed. luring himself into her orbit. Back to back, huh? Zyra nodded, her bio-armor's tendrils snapping to life, her stance steady as steel. They want blood, she said, voice low and fierce. They'll get a fight. Kael grinned, wild and shaky, adrenaline pumping through him. That's my girl, he muttered, turning to face the onslaught. The forest pulsed louder, slime dripping faster, like it was feeding off the chaos. Dren charged, claws raised, his team closing in, and the air crackled with heat and fury. Kael flexed his scarred hands, ready to go down swinging. Bring it on, he growled, and the world erupted around them. Kael's heart slammed against his ribs as he dodged a swipe from one of Dren's goons, the fight blurring around him. He caught a glimpse of Zyra, her silver form weaving through the chaos, slamming a guard into a tree with a burst of raw power. Damn, he thought, ducking another blow. She's something else. And right then, it hit him like a freight train. He loved her. Not some sappy, storybook crap, but a real, gut-deep ache that made his chest tight. When did that happen? He wondered, parrying a claw with a stick he'd snatched off the ground. He'd seen her fight before, sure, but this was different. Her fire, her grit, the way she didn't flinch even as slime splattered her face. I can't lose her, he realized, the thought slicing through the adrenaline. It scared him shitless. Not the blades or the blood, but the idea of her going down, of those red eyes going dark. No way, he vowed, gritting his teeth. Not happening. I'll bleed out first. He'd survived too much to let this break him, and now it wasn't just about him. It was about her. Zyra's shout snapped him back, her voice sharp as she took down another attacker. He saw her falter just for a second, her arm trembling under a heavy hit. She's worried, he thought, catching the flicker in her eyes. Thinks she's not strong enough. It pissed him off, her doubting herself when she was a damn force of nature. He locked eyes with her across the fray, nodding once, fierce and sure. You've got this, his look said, and he saw her straighten, her red gaze flaring brighter. That's it, he thought, grinning despite the chaos. We're tougher together. The fight kicked into overdrive, and Kael threw himself into it, shoulder-checking a guard as Zyra slammed another into the slime-soaked ground. The red muck coated them both now, slick and warm, sticking to their skin as they moved. Kael's breath came fast, ragged, the air burning his lungs as he ducked a blade and swung back with his stick. It cracked against the guy's armor, splintering, and Kael cursed, tossing it aside. Gotta improvise, he thought, grabbing a fallen vine and whipping it into the guard's face. The guy stumbled, and Kael tackled him, slamming his head into the dirt. Zyra fought like a storm beside him, her bio-armor glowing as she punched through a chest plate, sending a guard sprawling. But Dren was closing in, his roar shaking the trees as he barreled toward Kael. Time's up, outsider, he bellowed, claws slashing. Kael dove, rolling through the slime, but he wasn't fast enough. Dren's claw caught his side, tearing through his jacket and into flesh. Pain exploded, hot and sharp, and Kael hit the ground hard, blood soaking his shirt. Shit, he gasped, clutching the wound, red dripping through his fingers. Zyra's scream cut through the haze, raw, furious. Kael, she yelled, spinning toward him as Dren raised his claw again. Her eyes blazed, and then, boom, energy erupted from her, a red wave of light blasting out. It hit Dren and his crew like a tidal wave, slamming them back into the trees with cracks of breaking bone. Kael blinked through the pain, stunned, watching her drop to her knees beside him. Don't you die, you idiot, she snapped, her voice shaking as she pressed her hands to his chest, right over the gash. Warmth flooded him, her bioenergy seeping in, stitching him up, but it hurt like hell, and he groaned, head lolling. Still kicking, he rasped, forcing a weak grin. His hand fumbled to his belt, finding the bioenergy core he'd kept stashed, the damn thing that started this mess. Gotta end this, he thought, fingers slick with blood as he ripped a wire from a busted guard's armor nearby. He twisted it around the core, rigging it fast, a trick he'd pulled 100 times. Zyra, he croaked, Get back. She hesitated, eyes wide, but nodded, pulling away as he chucked the makeshift bomb at Dren. The core hit the ground and blew, a deafening blast of light and heat tearing through the forest. Dren roared, caught in the explosion, his scales charring as he collapsed, done for. Kael slumped back, vision swimming, the pain fading as Zyra's energy kept him alive. Got him, he wheezed, grinning up at her. She glared, but her hand stayed on him, steady and warm. Kael lay there, chest heaving, the forest quiet now, except for the drip of slime and the crackle of dying tech. Zyra knelt over him, her hands still pressed to his chest, her red eyes fierce but soft, like she'd just pulled him back from the edge. "You're a damn fool," she muttered, but her voice cracked, giving her away. He chuckled, weak. "Yeah, but I'm your fool now." Footsteps crunched through the wreckage. Matriarch Vorin, stepping out of the shadows, her biotendrils swaying as she loomed over them. Her gray face was unreadable, but her voice rumbled low. "He protected you," she said to Zyra, glancing at Kael like he was a puzzle she'd just solved. "He's proven himself." Zyra didn't look at her mom, just kept her eyes on Kael, her grip tightening on his hand. "Damn right he has," she said, quiet but firm. Kael squeezed back, feeling her pulse through her silver skin, steady and strong. Their eyes locked, saying everything words couldn't. He'd fought for her, bled for her, and she'd saved him right back. "We're in this," he thought, a tired grin tugging at his lips. "No going back." Vorin turned away, her voice fading as she ordered the guards to clean up. "Rest," she said. "You've earned it." Zyra helped Kael sit up, her arm around him, and he leaned into her, too beat to care who saw. "Guess we're stuck together now," he murmured, half joking. She smirked, sharp and real. "You'll live with it," she shot back, and he laughed, knowing she was right. They belonged, scarred, stubborn, and unbreakable. Kael Voss slumped against a slimy tree in the wrecked bioforest, his side still throbbing from Dren's claw despite Zyra's bioenergy patching him up. He wiped blood and muck off his face, grinning through the ache as Zyra stood over him, her silver skin streaked with red goo, her red eyes glinting in the fading light. "Well," he rasped, catching his breath. "That was a hell of a party." She snorted, and crouched beside him, her hand brushing his arm like she was checking he was still in one piece. "You're insane," she said, but there was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. Matriarch Vorin loomed nearby, her gray form towering over the guards hauling Dren's charred body away. Her biotendrils twitched as she turned to them, her voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The trials are over," she said, eyes flicking between Kael and Zyra. "You've proven your worth, Earthman. The oath beneath the skin is complete." Kael raised an eyebrow, leaning back. "So what? I'm free now. No more crazy alien tests." Vorin's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Free," she said, "if you choose it." Kael glanced at Zyra, her hand still on his arm, and felt that pull again, that stubborn, reckless thing that had kept him here through all the chaos. "Yeah, about that," he said, pushing himself up with a grunt, wincing as his side protested. He faced Vorin, boots squishing in the slime, and squared his shoulders. "I'm not big on your fancy rituals. Binding me to her like some prize bull? Nah, that's not my style." Zyra's eyes narrowed, but he held up a hand, grinning. "Hang on, princess. I'm not done." He took a step closer to her, close enough to feel her heat, and lowered his voice. "I don't want your mom's rules or some forced deal. I want us on our terms. Come with me. The Raven's Claw ain't much, but it's mine, and I'd rather have you there than stuck here playing royal puppet." Zyra blinked, her red eyes wide for once, and Kael held his breath, half expecting her to slug him. Instead, she laughed, sharp, real, cutting through the forest hum. "You're serious," she said, shaking her head. "You think I'd leave all this for your junk heap?" "Damn right I do," he shot back, smirking. "You hate being caged. I saw it in that mind-meld crap. Flying free, fighting for it. I'm offering that. No strings, no bullshit. Just us out there." He jerked a thumb at the sky, the stars just visible through the canopy. Zyra stared at him, long and hard, and he saw it. The spark, the fire he'd fallen for. "Mother," she said, turning to Vorin without breaking eye contact with him. "I'm going with him." Vorin's tendrils stilled, her face unreadable. Then she laughed, a deep, rolling sound that shook Kael's bones. "Bold," she said, nodding. "Very well. You'll be our eyes beyond Zarathra. Ambassadors, if you will. Don't disgrace us." Kael smirked. "No promises." Zyra elbowed him, but her grin matched his as they turned toward the tunnel out. They staggered back to the Raven's Claw, Kael limping, Zyra steadying him with an arm around his waist. The ship sat there, dented and ugly, but to Kael was perfect. They climbed aboard, settling into the cockpit, and he sank into his chair with a groan. "Home sweet home," he muttered, kicking his boots up. Zyra slid into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers brushing his as they both reached for the controls. "You sure about this?" he asked, half teasing. She smirked, leaning closer. "Try keeping up with me, Earthman." He laughed, loud and free, and they powered up the ship together, hands locked on the throttle as it roared to life. 2 years later, the Raven's Claw cut through a wild patch of space, dodging asteroid chunks like it was second nature. Kael Voss leaned back in his chair, boots propped on the console, a fresh scar on his cheek from some dumb job they just pulled off. The ship was still a mess, more dense, more patches, but it hummed strong, a testament to their knack for surviving anything the galaxy threw at them. Zyra sat beside him, her silver skin glinting under the cockpit lights, her red eyes scanning a star map with that sharp focus he'd come to love. "We're late," she said, smirking. Again, Kael shrugged, grinning. "Yeah, well, diplomacy's not our strong suit." They turned into something out there. Rogue ambassadors, troublemakers with a cause, running missions for Zarathra and anyone else who paid decent. Vorin's deal had held. Freedom with a side of chaos, just how they liked it. The galaxy knew their names now. Kael and Zyra, the human and the Zarathran who'd blown through every rule and come out laughing. "Not bad for a smuggler and a princess," Kael muttered, sipping from a flask that didn't smell half as bad as his old stuff. Then the ship jolted, a sharp cry echoing from the back. "Oh, crap," Kael said, jumping up. Zyra was already moving, and they bolted to the tiny med bay they'd rigged up. Inside, a makeshift crib rocked, 2 kids, barely a year old, kicking up a storm. The boy had Zyra's red eyes, glaring like he owned the place, while the girl had Kael's dark hair, grinning through her wales. "Twins," Kael groaned, scooping up the boy. "Why we think this was a good idea?" Zyra grabbed the girl, smirking as she hushed her. "Because you're an idiot who doesn't think," she shot back, but her eyes were soft. It had happened fast, Zyra's pregnancy hitting them like a comet after a wild night on some backwater moon. "Guess we're a team in everything," Kael had said, half panicked when she told him. Now, juggling kids on a ship built for smuggling, not parenting, was their new normal. "Kael Jr. has got your temper," Zyra teased, nodding at the boy squirming in his arms. "And Zyra Jr. has got your mouth," he fired back, dodging a tiny fist. They laughed, the sound filling the cramped space, and Kael felt it, a weird, warm thing he hadn't known he could have. Later, they stood at the viewport, the twins strapped into harnesses on their chests, quiet for once. The galaxy stretched out, endless and wild, stars blinking like promises. "We changed it, didn't we?" Kael said, glancing at Zyra. "Zarathra, Earth, all of it." She nodded, her hand finding his fingers lacing tight. "More than I thought we could," she said, her voice steady. He looked at her, scarred, fierce his, and grinned. "Still the worst smuggler ever, though. Hooked the most dangerous girl out there." Zyra pulled him closer, her smirk sharp. "And I'm stuck with you," she murmured, her breath warm on his cheek. The Raven's Claw hummed beneath them, the twins cooing softly, and Kael laughed, low and free. "Here's to more trouble," he said, and they turned back to the stars, the ship soaring into the dark, beat up, bold, and ready for whatever came next.